Welcome to Theology, Things, and Stuff. On this episode, I sit down and interview Chief of Police Scott Winfree. As a 30-plus year veteran of the police, he has a lot of insight on how policing has changed in the last several decades. And in light of the recent BLM movement, it's an interesting insight to see how police handle things, how they used to handle things, and how they have to handle things to today. We also get to see some insight and hear about what it was like being raised in Middle Tennessee as a Japanese American in the 70s. I hope you enjoy it. I certainly learned a lot. I think you'll be blessed. Here's our theme song.
Some important topics, some not so much, about where we began and where we'll end up, and everything in between on Theology, Things, and Stuff.
Well, Chief, I'm happy to have you with us here. We call this thing Theology, Things, and Stuff, and I appreciate you being willing to come on the air here and talk to us about it. We've been wanting to talk to just Christians from every walk of life, so to be able to have the Chief of Police, the new appointed Chief of Police here in Cookeville, come on. I'm just honored you'd sit down with us.
Hey, I'm glad to be here. Absolutely.
So people watching or listening don't know anything about you. So tell us, where are you from? You're from here in Middle Tennessee?
Born and raised in Putnam County, Baxter, Tennessee. Grew up on a family farm. My father's side of the family, been in Tennessee since the 1700s.
Wow.
And my mother, he was, when the Korean War broke out, my dad was actually a barber down in Nashville. And he walked across the street and enlisted in the Air Force at Berry Field. And he got stationed in Japan, and that's where he met my mother.
So what Okinawa?
No, he was at Itazuki Air Base,
okay,
which is in Fukuoka, in that area.
Okay.
Yep.
And so then met your mother.
Yes.
So your mother was Japanese.
My mother's Japanese.
So
yep.
For those that are listening, they can't tell you have an ethnic look about you, but it's because you're half Japanese.
That's correct. Yes.
So what was life? So what year were you born?
I was born in 1965.
65. So
yes.
What was life like growing up in Putnam County in the mid-70s, half Japanese?
Well, I'll say this. So I have two older brothers. One's 12 years older than I am. One's 10 years older than I am. And, for me personally, I never really had any issues, faced any true bigotry or anything like that. I know my mother always said, no one's better than you. She'd say, you're no better than anybody else. Nobody's any better than you. Don't let anybody treat you that way, and don't treat anybody that way. And that's the way I grew up, and that's just instilled in me. And she always said, if somebody behaves that way or is either racist or has a prejudice against you, that's on them.
Yeah.
That's not on you. You go about your business, and I know my brothers were very much that way. My sister's that way also. They just had that attitude of, we've all just had that attitude of, you're not bothering me, you're bothering yourself.
Because, as Southerners, we have a reputation for being racist or prejudiced. So I was just curious, growing up mid-70s, and so your brothers would have been mid-60s.
Yes.
Half Japanese, so obviously not white, not definitely an ethnic look.
Yeah.
But no issues here?
They didn't have any issues.
That's awesome.
I've got my oldest brother graduated, I believe his third honor. My other brother was very athletic, very smart. And my sister, she graduated third honor. I did not get their brains, but I missed out by a point or two on my GPA. But anyway, we really never experienced something. There was something that occurred when my sister was in high school that really upset my father.
Yeah.
And that was one of my sister's friend, and they were real good friends. She was going to go over there, and this girl's father said something that was basically said, she's not going to be allowed in my house. And my dad actually knew this guy. They grew up together. And I thought he was going to go down there and have a discussion with me, but that didn't occur. So
wow.
That honestly, that never happened. I know growing up, when you're little, 8, 9, 10 years old, playing with your friends. Of course, back then you went out inside and played with your friends.
Yeah.
And, we'd play Army, but we always fought the Germans,
Yes, yeah.
All my friends say, okay, we'll fight the Germans, not the Japanese.
I was watching, Pat Morita,
Yes.
Mr. Miyagi was on Happy Days before that. He was a stand-up comic previously. I don't know. I never knew that. I caught him on, Rhett Fox used to have a TV show,
Okay.
a variety show, which was real popular in the 60s or 70s. I caught Pat Morita, and he was doing stand-up on Rhett Fox's show. And Rhett Fox said, I didn't know you were Japanese. And Pat Morita said, Rhett, I haven't been Japanese since 1945. Whatever we can do to fit in.
Right.
How was it for your mother, though, coming from Japan? How did she make the adjustment to the States and Tennessee?
I think she did really well. Of course, when she came to the United States, she, at the best, spoke broken English. So she learned English. She went through all the classes and got her citizenship. And it was actually, I remember seeing a picture, I think my sister has it now, it was in a newspaper article. It showed her and my two brothers. Of course, she got her citizenship before I was born. And, she's there and she's doing the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. It shows the flag in the background. And there was a news article about her getting her citizenship.
That's cool.
And, she worked. She was a very hard worker. I think back, we'd get up in the morning, she'd have breakfast. She'd go to work. My dad was a farmer. We ran cattle. And, but she would go to work. I remember she used to work at Red Cap when it was a pants factory down here on Jefferson. And then later on, when I actually entered kindergarten in 1970, she worked at the cafeteria at Baxter Elementary School. But she'd get up, cook us breakfast, and go to work. We'd come home. We'd do our chores, do whatever, and always had a big supper every night. Now, you talk about, I'll bring a little family thing in here. You talk about some of the things growing up. So my grandmother, I never saw her really speak to my mother. And she lived 90 feet away from us.
You're talking about your dad's mother?
My dad's mother.
Okay.
Now, but every night, I know my brothers did this, and I did this up until the time my grandmother passed away in 1976. My mother would make her a plate of food every night, and we'd take it up to her. We'd give it to her, and then next day we'd get that plate and take it back home. But as for my grandmother loved us as grandchildren, but she did have problems with her being Japanese.
You think it's because of World War II?
I think so, yes. Because my grandfather loved my mother, thought the world of her. And my grandmother's sisters really liked my mother, but it was just...
How old was your mom when she came to the States?
She would have been 21.
Wow.
Yeah, so she obviously spent the majority of her life in the United States. Yep.
She teach you guys any Japanese?
Not really, because I think back about it, and I've talked to my brothers about this. We were, she was still learning English.
Yeah.
And I would listen to her talk to her friends. Call them up. They'd come. There were several Japanese people who lived here in Putnam County. And a little side note, I've heard this said about the South, and I've also heard it. My mother say this and other people. Japanese people really like the South, Southeast in general, because the geography, the topography, the vegetation is very similar, and the hospitality is very similar.
Sure.
To the Japanese culture.
It's honorable.
Yes. And so you see a lot of Japanese people in the Southeast, but she didn't really teach us Japanese. I remember hearing conversations in Japanese, but
did she cook a lot of Japanese food?
It's funny that you say that. So, supper would be, it could be, now, like I said, we raised a lot of cattle. So we ate a lot of beef. It could be steaks, or hamburger, turnip greens, pinto beans, cornbread, sushi, octopus, any number of things. So I've noticed my friends within a year or two of me growing up, they would come over, and my mother was a great cook. If people that knew her here in the county knew her, they knew she was a great cook. And so I had friends, my sister had friends, my brothers had friends. Again, we're talking 1960s, 1970s, Baxter.
Baxter, Tennessee.
But they grew up, some of my friends come over and eat sushi. Here's a little octopus, she'd boil that up.
Where's she getting octopus in Baxter, Tennessee in the 1960s?
I don't know where she got it from, but
she made probably Nashville.
Yeah. I know she would go, growing up, we'd go to Nashville, but there was also an Asian store in Atlanta.
Okay.
And she had a cousin who lived in Atlanta, so periodically we'd go down there and she'd buy stuff and bring it back up.
Wow. Probably eel.
Oh, eel. Yeah,
squid.
Absolutely. Squid. And like I said, she'd made something called sukiyaki. She would take ribeye steak, and after we'd sold all her cattle, it's funny, she'd go to Kroger, and the butcher over at Kroger knew my mother real well, knew exactly what she wanted. She would call or tell them while she was shopping, and they would put that ribeye in the freezer to get it firm, not freeze it, but to get it real firm. And they knew exactly how she wanted it cut, and they'd cut it in certain slices, and then she'd come home and cook it the way she wanted to. But the butcher at Kroger knew my mother real well.
So you guys were raised in church?
Yes. Well, my brothers were, my sister was, and I honestly kind of fell in a gap. I went to a Methodist church in Baxter when I was young, and then I just kind of fell out of it. And, I don't know how to really explain it.
Yeah.
But I've had this conversation with my wife, and, when someone, let's say, gets the Spirit or they have a revelation and they become saved, I can never think in my entire life of not knowing that God and Jesus Christ existed.
Right.
I just now have no concept of never not knowing that.
Right.
And, I know, but when I truly turned my life over to Jesus Christ, I can remember the moment I did it. And it was actually when I was older, and I was already a police officer, and I was in a pursuit. Another officer was chasing a young man we ended up catching him over towards Sparta. And in the middle of that pursuit, a feeling just came over me. And in the middle of it, I said, "Dear Lord, I give my life to you."
Wow. And
it was right in front of where Sportsman's World is on South Jefferson. I can remember it to this moment. And that's when I truly turned my life over to Jesus Christ.
So, but your dad's family was Methodist there in Baxter. So did your mom ever go to church? Did she ever convert to Christianity?
Yes. My mother was Christian.
Wow.
Yes.
Was she Christian in Japan, or was she Taoist or Shintoist?
I never had a discussion with her about it, really. But I do know, she was saved and member of the Methodist Church there in Baxter.
I'm a Southerner from Louisiana and Tennessee. These are like stories that just fit outside the box, It's just cool to hear about a Baxter boy go to Japan for the military, meet a Japanese woman, marry her, bring her back, and someone who assimilates our culture.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So when did you know you wanted to be a police officer?
Well,
being a farmer's kid.
Well, I jokingly say this. Everybody in my family, and that's kind of stretching it, but we're either engineers or police or in law enforcement. So the engineering part of it, my oldest brother's an engineer. My sister's an engineer. I've got 3 or 4 cousins that are engineers. She got her PhD, and she got a double master's when she graduated from Michigan. I think she got to Michigan State. Anyway, she's got a PhD from Cal Poly. And anyway, that, or we're in law enforcement. My grandfather, during the Depression, ran a bus line from Baxter to Detroit, because a lot of people going to Detroit, getting jobs in the automotive industry as best they could. And he ended up going up there and became a Detroit police officer. His brother, of course, they grew up in the down around Buffalo Valley. His brother took a load of pigs up to Maryland, all right, and this is in the 30s, and he ended up becoming a police officer in Washington, D.C., and he became his exact title, I won't say he was like a chief deputy, but I've seen newspaper articles about when he retired. Their other brother actually became an FBI agent in Hoover during the 30s when the FBI was originally formed.
Wow.
So I say all that. My grandfather said he always wanted a lawyer in the family. So when I was at Tech, I started out in mechanical engineering. Okay, I thought, I'm going to be an engineer. But I kept thinking about what my grandfather had said. And honestly, I didn't know him. He lived in Detroit. So my grandmother and my grandfather were divorced, but he lived in Detroit. But I'd talked to him a few times. And my dad always said that he always wanted a lawyer in the family. So anyway, I decided to change my major. I thought, I'm going to go to law school. I'm going to kind of do what my grandfather wanted, for the family. And while I was at Tech, I got an internship my senior year with a local attorney. Very grateful that, he gave me that internship. And then after the internship was over, he hired me to continue working. Now, I'm already a senior at Tech. Now I'm about to graduate. And I decided, I figured out I didn't want to be a lawyer.
What did you find so averse about it?
Well, so, myself growing up, I've always been a very, kind of a rule follower or having a sense of fair play. If it's right, it's right. If it's wrong, it's wrong. It's not necessarily black and white.
Right.
I accept, there's gray areas, but a sense of fair play.
Sure.
I've always had that in my personality, and I've always been one to try to protect people. And, and I'm not disparaging lawyers. I mean, we need attorneys. Our legal system relies on ethical, good attorneys. And, but at the same time, it didn't fit my personality. So after I graduated Tech, that's 1987.
What did you get your degree in?
I got in sociology and criminal justice.
Okay. And that's Tennessee Tech.
That's Tennessee Tech. And I graduated from there. My oldest brother at the time had a engineering and construction firm down in Mount Juliet he'd started. So I went to work for him for about a year and a half. And I remember I went on a fishing trip with a good friend of mine down to Florida. And when I come back, my dad said, "Hey, I got an application for you for Cookeville Police Department." I said, "Okay." And I applied, and it's fit my personality.
Sure.
And I have, it was a true blessing. Like I said, I literally stepped out of the truck when I got home, and he said, "Here, I got an application for you." And I applied here, I applied with the state, and the day that Cookeville hired me, the state got a hold of me, but I wanted to stay in Putnam County.
Is that 1987, 88?
It was 1989. It was the summer of 89.
Okay, so you worked for your brother for about a year or so?
Yeah, about a year and a half, 2 years, right in that time frame.
That's one of the things I've found, especially, as a chaplain with our police and getting to know the officers. There's a lot of them, they feel it's a sense of a calling. And the Bible affirms as much that there's that ministry of wrath, that ministry of that is God's agent to do law enforcement, and there has to be a grace to be able to do that thing in life.
I've looked back on my life and how I got to where I'm at, and it was a blessing that the way things fell in place. That's the only way. I had honestly I hadn't really thought about going into law enforcement at that point. I was, I was working for my brother and stuff. But the fact that I had changed my degree when I was a sophomore in college, and my personality, I've just always been that way. So it fit, and I'm just blessed and fortunate that I got in this line of work.
What do you enjoy most about police or police work?
When I was, so I'm not on the road anymore.
Sure, yeah. As chief, you're kind of the big executive.
I'm in an office, but when I was a patrol officer, and I've worked in patrol, and I've worked in as a narcotics officer, and I've done different things. I've been on the SWAT team, but as a police officer on the road, as a patrol officer, you see something different every day. No one call is the same. And you get to talk to people, and you get to help people.
Yeah.
All right. So we all watch on television all the exciting stuff. Of course, they got to make everything exciting as they can in 30 minutes or an hour. But 90% of what we do, you're meeting people when they're in a sense of turmoil, and that could be anything from a physical assault. They've been robbed, they've been burglarized, to something, while somebody may not think it's that traumatic's not necessarily the right word I'd use, but, somebody's neighbors, their dog just won't quit barking.
Sure.
And you go and you can talk to these people. But you're dealing with people who are in some heightened sense of distress, you could say. And to be able to calm them down best you can and to reassure them, and to try to fix their problem. And I guess that's the biggest thing. I was telling somebody that I like to fix problems.
Yeah.
And that I've just always liked to do that. And, the exciting stuff, absolutely. Chasing somebody, catching the bad guy, they're the bad guy, and you catch them. That being said, good people do bad things. And you just happen to be catching somebody doing something bad at that time. They may, a lot of the people that I've arrested, that I've dealt with, I see them out here on the street, have perfectly good conversation with them. They understand I'm doing my job. They're doing what they were doing at the time.
Yeah. And
I came across somebody the other day, I arrested him several times, and that was 25 years ago. And they tell me, I've cleaned my life up. I'm doing a lot, I've devoted my life to Jesus and the church. And they've turned their life around.
Yeah.
And I love seeing that. But, and there's still those out there that aren't too appreciative.
No.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been fascinating to watch with some of our officers, to even see them. If I'm out on a ride along with them, they'll stop and see somebody that they maybe arrested a week ago or a month ago, and stop and just be friendly with them.
Oh, yeah.
And I was asking one of them, I said, why do you do that? And they said, because I'm probably going to have to arrest them again.
Yeah.
And I don't want them to fight me.
Yeah.
I just want them to know it's nothing personal. I don't have anything against you. If you're not breaking the law, I don't have to arrest you.
Yeah. I'll tell you a story. So when my middle son, he was either a senior in high school or he may have just graduated, and he had a Jeep. He's driving down Willow. And he said, out of the blue, I saw somebody standing there, and I decided to give him a ride. Never done that. I don't think he's ever done it since. But he said, I stopped, let him get in. I said, where are you going? And I start driving that direction. And we get to talking. And, my sons have a lot of my features. And he says, the guy looks at him and says, you know Scott Winfree? And he goes, my son said, uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
I said, yeah. I said, yeah, he's my dad. Oh, yeah. He's arrested me a bunch of times. and I remember my son was like, I'm going to get killed. And he said, we're talking. He said, yeah, he's always treated me right, and never had a problem. Think the world of him.
Yeah.
And I have had arrested this guy several times. He said, my son said, I got him to where we were going. He gets out. He pulls out a pocket knife. And he's like, oh, what's going to happen? And he said, he handed it to him. He said, I appreciate it. Thank you for the ride.
Wow.
But this one person I'd always, whenever I dealt with someone who was breaking the law, I never took it personally. And that's one thing I try to tell my officers. I said, we have a job to do. And so don't get too emotionally attached to this one call. Understand you have a job to do, and you treat people with dignity. And you treat people the way they allow you to treat them, but you start out treating them with dignity, and but you do your job.
In light of, I'm just thinking as you're talking here, of course, so this is 2025, the time we're recording this, and we've just come through COVID, and we had a lot of anti-police sentiment flare up, and I think that thing really took off in the early 90s with the Rodney King thing and the videos. It seems to me, so correct me if I'm wrong, because you've been in law enforcement going on 40 years.
Yeah.
It seems to me, obviously, you don't police every city the same,
right?
Because not every city has the same personality, the same attitude, the same culture. I think the thing I learned, having been with our police department as a chaplain, that there is no standardized set for how do you police. Like there's no national standardization. Right. So can you speak to that? Like, I hate seeing cops get a bad rap. I recognize that there are bad cops, but why do you think? Just what can you speak to? Why are some departments known for corruption? Why, of course, that tarnishes good departments and good policing. But why does this unfold like in certain cities? What do you see?
Well, it's multifaceted. It's not never just one thing. I'll speak to Cookeville, Tennessee, and one thing that has been in place since I've been here, and I know it was going on before that, is the emphasis on training. I've had an axiom. I've been a training officer. Again, tactically speaking, it's always been my thing. But I have this axiom that I don't know where I heard it from, but I believe in it. People never rise to the occasion. They fall to their level of training. So what we try to do at the Cookeville Police Department is have a very rigorous hiring procedure. We vet people the best that we can, and then we train them the way that we want them to interact with people. And that also just comes with personality. I'm a firm believer in, if we're driving down the road and you see someone that's got a flat tire, you get out and help them. You stop traffic, you get out and help them. If you see someone needing help, you obviously help them. You just sit out and talk to people. One thing that I'm wanting to do, and that I plan on getting started here very soon, is implementing some walking patrols. And it's kind of funny because used to, if you put it on walking patrol, you were kind of being punished.
Right.
But now I want it to be part of an everyday thing, especially during day shift or during the summer when the daylight's a little longer and our night shift can get out and walk neighborhoods, walk business areas, walk the parks, and talk to people. Just talk to people.
Sure.
So that's the personality, I guess you could say, that I want to say. And I think that's always been something here at Cookeville. The previous chiefs have always wanted something very similar to that, to be engaged with the community. Whenever you get into very large police departments or in certain areas, if your law enforcement officers don't necessarily live in the community that you're policing, there's always problems.
Sure.
And sometimes, that could be due to economic reasons or whatever, but your law enforcement officers, in my opinion, need to live in and be part of the community they're policing and know the people that they're where they're working. So it can be anything from lack of training. It could be an attitude from superiors. The subculture in the department can lead toward, I'll say, corruption or people acting a certain way. And on the totally opposite side of that coin is that if you have the correct attitude, the correct culture within the police department, you won't have that. Now, one thing that has changed dramatically, and I've said this, is social media. When I got into law enforcement, there was no social media. It didn't exist. And what I see a lot of officers around the country, when they see something happen in a large urban area, or they see something happen at one police department. And then how maybe the public reacts to that, they kind of internalize that and think that's happening here in Cookeville, Tennessee, but it's not.
Yeah, it's not.
It's not happening here. And that's one thing I talk to officers about. I say, look, this isn't X city. You know, that's you look around the community we have, the support we have from the community, and while at any moment something very bad could happen anywhere, at any department, understand that you have community support. And we do. It's been that way since I've worked here. And I wouldn't just say the city of Cookeville. I just the whole Upper Cumberland area, Tennessee in general.
Yeah. I think because I get to travel a lot, and even as a preacher, I get to minister in a lot of cities. And I can testify that every city has a different personality, as diverse as a congregation of people. And certainly cities have different populations, they have different subcultures, they have different sizes of police force. Like what is the it's like New York City had 30 or 40,000 cops?
The last I heard is 38,000.
38. So the New York City has 38,000 police. That's like the size of our city.
That's right.
That's crazy to think about. A police force the size of a small town.
Oh, yes.
How do you even manage that many cops? It's hard to wrap your mind around. And like, I don't know, I think they had a shooting in the county here a few weeks ago over in Allgood area, but Chicago will have 30 shootings on a weekend.
Yes.
So I think when folks want to try to make every police department the same, they fail to recognize every city's different, every police force is different. And as you're saying, every administration is different, and it's trained. They're all trained different.
Yes. I
think that, like I said earlier, the thing that shocked me the most when I went through our Citizens Academy was to hear that there is no national standardization for police departments, that every department determines how they want, within some degree, how they want to police their citizenry.
Yes. So in the state of Tennessee, the Post Commission is in charge of certain levels. You know, there's certain legislative training that's required for law enforcement. So that has to be met every year. But beyond that, there's recommendations that come down. For the past several years, there's been an emphasis on dealing with people in crisis, whether that be, just any type of crisis. We've been really leaning toward that, focused a lot of training hours in dealing with people who might be having, suffering from depression, paranoia, schizophrenia, and recognize, teaching our officers how to recognize that they're not dealing with somebody who is just mad.
Right.
This person is truly in some type of mental crisis. And it has changed the way, I'll say this, and I put a lot, when I think about a lot of things, the way I think, I want to contribute a lot of that to Chief Evans.
Our previous
chief. And that is to look at people and have empathy for them and to try to help them. So we focus, like I said, a lot of the training on people who might be in crisis and try to get them help.
Yeah.
Now, again, let's not sugarcoat things. We're in law enforcement. Sometimes we deal with bad people.
Right.
And we have to do what we have to do to enforce the law. But, I think back, I don't know if you've ever dealt with anybody in some type of, they're having a diabetic reaction of some type.
Yep.
One of our officers one time got behind someone coming south on Willa, and you would have thought it was the worst drunk driver you'd ever seen. This person was southbound on Willa, right around 4th Street in that area. They were crossing both lines of traffic going southbound, plus crossing into the northbound lane. They end up having a wreck. And the officer, we get there, they get out, they get the person down, and if you've ever dealt with somebody, it is like they're intoxicated. But he immediately picked up on certain signs and got them got the ambulance there. They took their blood sugar and checked their blood sugar. It was way down. I guess getting close to going into diabetic coma.
Wow.
And was able to get them help, But that was due to training. I know I've answered, I can think of one in particular. I worked a crash out on Dry Valley Road one time. And again, when I got there, you could detect a certain odor. And I could tell this woman wasn't intoxicated, but you would think she was. And same thing, got an ambulance there. But that, you don't know those things unless you've been trained.
Sure.
And we have a strong emphasis on training.
So here's a loaded question then. So we are 4 years post George Floyd. So with you as an officer with so many years, decades of training, when you watched that footage from the spectators that went viral, what were your first thoughts seeing how they were detaining him and kneeling on him, and what were your thoughts?
Well, it was wrong. I'll just start with that premise. It was wrong. From what I understand about it, so that's what I'll say, that they had him arrested, had him in the patrol car, and then took him back out. There's never a reason to take somebody outside of a patrol car. Hardly ever. There may be an occasion.
Do you know what their explanation was for taking him out?
I do not. And one thing that we talk about, once we get somebody loaded up, we get that person, if we've arrested someone and there's a group of people or whatever it is, we try to remove them from that scene as quickly as possible. Because that in itself lowers tensions.
Sure.
Because they're no longer on scene. I'll also say this, when that occurred, there's always been this, discussion about de-escalation. Officers need to know how to de-escalate, and there needs to be reform. Well, every year, law enforcement officers around this country deal with reform because laws change on a yearly basis.
Yeah.
Technology changes. Along those lines with de-escalation, when I went through the academy in 1990, we were talking about de-escalation there because de-escalation only helps the officer.
Right.
I say it helps the officer. When I was a training officer, I used to tell people I were training, because again, you get 25, 21, 22, 23-year-old men, and we all like things that are exciting. But I said, you'll never have a 30-year career if you have to fight every single person you put in the back of this car. All right? Because that one person you fought, they'll say, I fought the police. It took 3 of them to get me in the car. But you got a wrenched up shoulder. The next one, you hurt your arm. Next one, you hurt your knee. And I said, you'll never make it. You got to learn to talk to people.
Yeah.
Calm them down. Let them understand, hey, you're under arrest. You're going to go to jail. But you're going to make bond, you're going to get out, you're going to have your day in court, and that's what our system is relied upon. And as long as people understand that, just because you're arrested doesn't mean you're guilty. It means we have probable cause to think you've committed a crime, And when you if you have a trial or when you get your attorney, if you have a trial, you may be found not guilty, whatever. But I've told those officers that I train, I said, you gotta calm people down.
Sure.
It's a lot better to talk somebody in the back of your patrol car than it is to have to lay hands on them. Not saying we won't.
Yeah.
Because I have.
Yes, sir.
But it's a lot better if things say, okay, yep, all right, okay. And they turn around, put their hands behind their back, you handcuff them, put them in the car, take them to jail.
What can you say? I'm just thinking about making bond. What are your thoughts on the whole no cash bond and the whole bond situation, which seems to be, for some, just a financial trap? Here with our church, we do a lot of jail ministry, and we hear a lot of their side of stuff about they constantly are accruing fees and fines, and they can't even get out of it. So then they get picked up and arrested for another warrant because they didn't make the last bond or the last fee, and it does seem stacked against them. Now, in one regard, I think you did the crime. Quit playing stupid games. But at this other hand, I could see how this could be a trap where they're just never going to get a second chance. And of course, as believers, we believe in redemption, we believe in restoration, and we want to give people that opportunity. But Because I don't understand the full system of how bond and no cash bond works and all that, but what's your perspective on that whole situation?
Of course, the concept of a bond is that someone is putting up property, cash, to ensure that you will appear in court. That's the whole premise behind that.
It's usually 10% of what the bond is.
If you're going through a bail bondsman.
Okay.
So if you're going through a bail bondsman, let's just say your bond is $1,000, and you pay a bail bondsman $100. They sign the bond. That's how they make their money. You've paid them $100. You don't get that $100 back. If you happen to have $1,000 in your pocket, you give the court, you give them $1,000. When you show back up for court, you'll get your $1,000 back. Okay, so that's the way that whole thing works. There are certain crimes, of course, that don't necessarily need a very high bond, but there's others that obviously do. You take some of some felonies, murder, truly especially aggravated assault, different things. So there needs to be some types of bond to ensure that you will appear in court. But, it can always be looked at.
Sure. So if that's how bond works, so then what is a no cash bond? You don't have to put forth any cash. Then what's the bond there? Well, that's the term I'm hearing a lot in the media.
So a no cash bond is you're just released. Some people call it an OR bond, released on your own recognizance. You're just giving your word that you'll show up.
Okay.
And there's definitely charges that's fine with.
Sure.
If you have someone who's charged with a relatively minor, let's say a misdemeanor, and I would not apply this to felonies. I would not do that. But, that's my position. But relatively minor misdemeanor, and they're a resident of the county. They've lived here most of their or all of their life, or they are attached here through employment or through going to school. Then I can understand that, having an OR bond.
Sure. Then what about, because the other thing I hear, just the court fees and the court fines, because a lot of these guys, they have trouble making that money,
sure,
paying it, and then it gets them in this kind of this do loop of, I'm going to jail again because I didn't pay the last fee, and I'm going to have another court fee. And again, I don't have a position on this. I'm just trying to learn.
Sure.
So what are your thoughts on that situation?
So, the fees can be set up on payments, and you would need to actually talk to the court.
Sure.
But more than, what I can say about that, because
fair enough.
Yeah, that's a whole different
It's like you guys just arrest them,
Yeah.
you transport them to jail. That's the county issue. Then they go to the jail, the courthouse.
Yeah, but I do know that payments, it can be set up on some type of payment system, and what I find is a lot of the people, true enough, we tend to arrest a lot of people for either failure to appear, or they didn't show up for court at all, or they're not making restitution. They're not paying their fines. But again, I believe we have a very reasonable payment system,
Sure.
from what I understand.
Sure.
But you need to talk to them to get more detail into it.
How over the decades of your policing, how have you seen policing change?
I kind of touched on this a little bit. The earlier in the sense of social media.
Okay.
And it's really about that attitude. Now, as far as the people that come into law enforcement that I've dealt with personally, that sense of calling, the sense of help, wanting to help people is there. They have that. It's innate within law enforcement officers. I would equate it, to somebody in the medical field, nurses, EMTs, even firemen. But, I say that. I got a lot of good friends in the firemen. But they just have this sense of wanting to help. Along with that, though, they also, in law enforcement, you have a lot of, alphas, male and female.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. And
it does take a certain personality type.
Takes a certain personality. When you think about it, you get a call, let's say a domestic, and you're walking into somebody's house, and you're telling them to sit down and tell me what happened. And you have to be able to take charge of that. You cannot be meek. Doesn't mean you have to be overbearing, but one thing we talk about is you start out with conversational language. If you're able to, just like you and I are sitting here talking, if you're able to gather information and calm something down with this type of the way our voices are, that's perfect. There's no need to escalate that. But there's been times, and I can think of multiple occasions throughout my career when just, raising your voice kind of puts, calms people back down. Other times, they're at a heightened state, so you kind of they'll mimic you if you start talking low and whatnot. So you have to be in control of yourself. It goes back to what I said about being emotional. You can't be emotional. You have to be in control of everything you do. But has law enforcement changed? So, technology has been a big part of that. When I first got started, I was issued Smith & Wesson 686 revolver. I was issued...
What caliber was that, 38?
357.
357.
357 Magnum. I was issued a total of 18 bullets, is what I was issued. I had dump pouches. They were dump pouches, and then I had 6 in the revolver. Again, I had a stick, a set of handcuffs, and a flashlight. That was it. If you look in a patrol car today and see what an officer has on them, our officers will have tourniquets. When they're on the road, they'll have an AED, EpiPens, Narcan, hemostatic bandages. We'll have tasers. We have spray. And you look in their car, it looks similar to a cockpit. I mean, of course, it's not, you've been in our cars. You've got a computer, you got printers, you got,
it's
radios.
A lot of technology.
A lot of technology in there. So again, technology has driven a lot of the way we respond to things.
Drones now, you guys have
drones. We have drones.
Thermal imaging.
Thermal imaging. And, again, technology has changed a great deal of that. But social media has really pushed so much stuff. It is the bane of society. And
Please say that again. Say that. I'm going to quote you. Say that again. Social media
is the bane of society.
Is the bane of society.
Yes, it is.
It has brought out the worst in us.
It really has. As I was growing up, I had 3 channels on the television. All right? At 5:30, the national news come on. Walter Cronkite, I think John Chancellor, I'm trying to remember some of the other ones. That'd last for 30 minutes. At 6 o'clock, local news out of Nashville would come on. And then you wouldn't have the news again until 10 o'clock. And if you wanted to know something, you read it. And it just seemed like, while, of course, there's always been contention between the political parties, but it just seemed to me that if you had a Democrat and you had a Republican sit down, most of the time they could sit and talk, And now, while I love our Constitution, but people can get so polarized.
Sure.
And you get to where all you listen to is your group of people.
Sure. And
you almost demonize the opposite. And I'm talking on both sides.
Yeah.
It's
an echo chamber.
Yeah, it is. That's exactly right. It's an echo chamber. One thing my dad used to do, when he'd watch the news, he would watch CNN. He'd watch Fox. He'd watch Al Jazeera. And what he was trying to do, he would try to watch everything to try to get more of an understanding, a balance.
A center, yeah.
And he would do that. And my dad loved to read, and he loved to know what was going on in the world. And but that's what he would try to do. He would try to get as many opinions. And that's another thing. In today's world, the news is no longer the news. It's opinion on both sides.
Yep.
And but if you can weed through that and get facts, in law enforcement, that's one thing we deal with. We deal with facts. And I know you have a very scientific background, and people have all kinds of opinions.
Yeah.
But then you say, okay, but what are the facts?
What are the facts?
What are the true facts? What's the facts of this case? And so again, social media is the bane of society.
I coined an expression probably 10 years ago. It kind of went viral, ironically, on social media in some circles. I said, social media is wildly popular because it gives people a voice when God would not.
Mm-hmm.
Gives people a platform when God wouldn't trust them to have one. And it proves the point that people like it. Everybody thinks their opinion matters.
Mm-hmm.
And I say it this way: if your opinion isn't benefiting you, why would you export it? Why share it?
Mm-hmm.
But I guess what I've seen, and maybe what I'm hearing you say, is that social media is making policing harder on you guys.
Yes. We have a saying, don't believe the narrative. Whenever you see something come out, and I'll speak in terms of law enforcement, that an officer did this, or can you believe that this police department is condoning this? How about researching it?
Research.
And because what you will find out more times than not, that the facts do not support the allegation.
Yeah.
And while, yes, and here's another thing that I have personally found. Other people may have another opinion or have other things that have occurred in their life to not necessarily believe what I believe. But that is that law enforcement officers around this country do not support law enforcement officers who are corrupt, because it does nothing but hurt our profession.
Sure.
And we don't want to be associated with that. Whenever I know someone or have heard about somebody, it's just like what occurred in Minnesota. What I saw, what I know of it, it was wrong.
Yeah.
And any type of corruption does nothing but damage our profession.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. And we tend to lump everybody together. Like as a preacher,
yes,
we have horrible reputations now. We're down there with lawyers, politicians, and car salesmen.
Mm-hmm.
And we're supposed to be the guys everybody can trust. But I don't know. It's like I say, every field has its corrupt individuals, because all the fields we're talking about have authority.
Yeah.
Like Lord Acton said, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So with police and authority, with preachers and authority, or lawyers or politicians,
mm-hmm.
you can see how it just takes a couple of bad characters to really ruin everybody's reputation.
And, and you can probably relate to this to some degree. As a preacher, something that can happen on the other side of this country, and you're lumped in with them.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what you see in law enforcement.
Yeah, with churches and preachers, because of like Jim Jones and David Koresh and maybe Tony Alamo, who hardly anybody knows of, you can maybe think of 3 genuine cults that our nation has dealt with in the last 40 years.
Right.
And now, because of 3 guys who were really weird
mm-hmm.
and got into weird compound living, yeah. and alcohol and drugs and weapons and money and sexual deviancy, anybody who's got a strong voice of leadership is called a cult leader. So now that's the pejorative,
Right.
Every preacher's a cult. That's a cult. That's a cult. Because of 3 guys.
Mm-hmm.
3, and probably most folks can only name Jim Jones. They couldn't tell you anything about David Koresh or Tony Alamo.
Right.
But those are the 3 most prominent cult leaders. And yeah, so we deal with it as preachers. And so like you guys, we don't like dirty preachers.
No.
I don't, yeah. And yeah, I just, to watch everything unfold the last couple of years with the police, you just hate it because you don't want to throw the babies out with the bathwater. And
right.
being from Seattle, they had the Chaz and the Chop, these
mm-hmm.
Center Hill, whatever, occupied zone, and just lunacy. And the irony of it is, they were supposed to be police-free zone, autonomous zone, the Center Hill autonomous, whatever. And yet they still had police within it. They had self-appointed police
yeah.
that were like gatekeepers.
Mm-hmm.
And the irony of it is, no matter where you go, you still have to have rules. And then you have to have, by default, those that help enforce the rules.
That's right.
And those are police officers.
Yeah. If you have, I'll just put it, if you have 2 people, you have to have rules.
Oh,
You
yes.
Once you go beyond yourself, you have to have rules. And those rules have to be enforced because if not, you'll have chaos.
Sure.
And anarchy. So.
Well, since going back to what you said earlier about when you gave your life to Christ in that pursuit, how has now being a Christian, and you attend a Baptist church out, is it in Baxter?
Yes.
Yeah. How does your faith, how does being a Christian affect you policing and now as chief?
I would say it gives me a sense of, what's the word I'm looking for? Of destiny is not the right word, but along those lines of
purpose.
I'm doing a sense of purpose. I'm doing what God wants me to do.
Yeah.
And that in itself gives me peace. It gives me confidence, no matter what turns out. Whether I look at myself as being an instrument, as we all are in our lives, an instrument of God. We may not necessarily, something bad could happen, but it happened for a purpose. Something good could happen, or something rather just benevolent. You just go about and you keep the status quo, but that's what God wanted. And that's the way I look at it. When I got appointed, I said, well, I could have a good long career as a police chief and make great things happen, which would be, in my way of thinking, that'd be really good. Or I could go out here and really mess up, make something bad happen, but they bring somebody in that needed to be here.
Sure.
And that's just that's the way I look at my life. I look at things as things that happen for a purpose. And I've been very introspective about that. I've thought about that a lot throughout my life. Why did this happen?
Right.
And maybe not knowing the why, but kind of following the track of, okay, this happened, and look where we're at now. This is good, or it's continuing. We may not like it right now, but let's see what happens.
When as former Chief Evans was getting ready to retire, I know you and I had talked about whether you should or shouldn't accept the new role of chief, because other than that, you could have retired pretty soon.
Oh yeah, I could have retired 4 or 5 years ago. I turned 60 here in 22 days. So,
but I remember talking to you there at the station, and I appreciate you saying you were praying, you were seeking God on would He have you take the chief's position, and I think that indicates humility, because what we need leaders who look to somebody greater than them. We need leaders that cry out to God. One of my favorite quotes, I just shared it recently. If you remember Pat Robertson, the preacher, he ran for president, I think in '88, on the Republican ticket after Reagan's second term. And people were real nervous because he was a pastor, he was a Pentecostal preacher, and he claimed to hear from God. And he would do so on his telecast, 700 Club, all the time. And they were asking somebody, does it bother you that he claims to hear from God? Does that make you want to vote for him or against him? And the one person said, that makes me feel real comfortable. I'm comfortable with him hearing from God. And they said, why? And they said, because that indicates he doesn't think he is God.
Yeah.
And they thought that was just such a comical, witty observation. If someone's going to bother to pray and claim to talk to God, that means they recognize they're not God,
right? That
there is a God, and I need His guidance on this.
I like that.
And that's what we need. We need people who are humble enough to say, I am only a man. I am prone to failure, and I need help. I need God Almighty helping me in this. So I don't know if I ever told you, I just walked away going, that man's going to go ask God, what does he need to do in this situation?
Yes.
And you're chief now.
I pray all the time.
Amen.
I pray all the time.
I would think as a police officer, you got to pray all the time.
Yeah. Oh, there's been times in certain situations you pray one way, and in this, but you're always praying, for physical security or just let me do the right thing. Let me do what I'm supposed to do that you want me to do. That's that. I try not to be too selfish in my prayer life in the sense of, hey, I want this, I want that. I always tend to focus on let me do what you want me to do.
Amen.
And just be accepting of that. So,
what's one of the craziest things you've seen in 40 years of policing? Give me some crazy police stories.
I can go from funny to tragic.
It's a small town. I don't.
I've done things. Just something just you don't think that much about is I remember there was an elderly couple up on 10th Street in that area. They had this bird that got in their chimney. All right. So I get up there and I get this bird. It was a woodpecker. And I'm able to catch this thing. I got soot all over me. And I got it out. And I drove it to the other side of town, and I thought, well, it's just going to fly back there, But I got the bird out. This is one of those topics that when people start bringing stuff up, I remember things.
Yeah.
But
you had a story about the cows getting free from the stockyard.
Oh,
was that you that had to shoot them?
Yeah, I've shot a cow or two, and
then had to drag it back to the stockyard.
So there was about 1,100-pound Charolais cow, and
what people don't know is the stockyard was on the main strip here in town. It's right by the Walmart.
So it was right beside Walmart. And, of course, I remember people used to say, well, why'd they put that in the middle of the town? Well, that was put there in 1947.
Yeah.
That was way outside the city limits of Cookeville when that was built. And so this, cows would get out from the stock barn occasionally. And the guys that worked down there at the time, they'd been chasing this cow all over town. So, if you had a 1,100-pound Charolais cow, running 45, 50 miles an hour, you might get killed.
Yeah. So
this cow's running, and they cannot, and they've been trying to catch it. And so finally, they're on Veterans Drive before the Gables and all that was ever even built. This truck stopped, and I climbed up in the back of it, and I was a sniper on the SWAT team at the time. And I shot this cow, and it dropped. And the boy inside said, "You missed." I said, "I didn't miss."
No, you didn't miss.
I didn't miss. That cow never moved. And the next thing I come back down through there, they had this poor carcass of a cow chained to a 2,500 Chevrolet, 3/4 ton Chevrolet.
Just
dragging it across Jefferson back to the stock barn. But these things happen.
I heard somebody else telling me they had a cow loose over here on the north side of Tech off of 12th, and they had to run it down and shoot it too.
Yeah.
There's no telling how many cows have been shot on the streets of our town.
Oh, I know it. Years ago, they got loose and didn't get shot and got up on the interstate and caused a wreck.
Wow.
So,
that's why you have to shoot them.
Because it's hard. A few years before that, one of our officers lassoed one going down Willow and butted the side of the cow. This wasn't as big. This is about a 500-pound steer. That's what this thing was. And so it wasn't overly big, but still it's 500 pounds. And just dented the car all to pieces.
Was he riding on top of the squad car, lassoing it?
No. I think he was able to pull up on it. Now, the officer did that. He's retired now. And he was known to do these things. I'll just put it that way. Cows. Of course, we tased a zebra.
Tell that story. Because
nobody
would believe that there was even a zebra that got loose here in Cookeville.
So he got loose, and I want to say it was loose from the exotic animal sales, that thing. And there was a zebra in Cookeville, and one of our officers tried to tase it. He did tase it. I don't think it was very effective. But animal calls are always kind of funny. You never know. I've gotten snakes out of people's houses. I've gotten raccoons out of a garage that was terrifying somebody one time.
All right, what about, we should probably have started with one or two tragic stories. I don't think people realize how much crime or just wickedness is even in a small little Christian community like ours.
You're exactly right. And, I heard a statement one time. I was talking to a Nashville officer, Metro Nashville officer. And he says, we all have to deal with the same thing. Just, down here at Metro, we just deal with it more often. But, in Cookeville, Baxter, all good, you still might deal with the same thing, just not as often. But, I think officers get so acclimated to it that we don't think that much about it. But someone goes through the Assistance Academy, and I can't tell you the number of times I've had people They've been in the citizen camp and said, I didn't know this went on in Cookeville.
Yeah.
So, murders, I've gone to murder scenes. I've recovered bodies. Some of the worst have been domestics. Now, I will say this, very seldom do you ever have stranger on stranger assaults. It's usually people that know each other.
Yeah.
You don't have that much random just violence, I'd say. What we have seen an uptick in is just property crimes that, whether it be burglaries or stuff, you still don't have that many robberies. So the difference between a robbery is a personal assault. You're taking something from a person, whereas a burglary, if it's from a business or house, no one should be there. An aggravated burglary is a burglary of a residence.
Yeah.
But you're not actually assaulting someone to take their property. But there is a lot of, there's violence. There's things that happen in Cookeville that people that live a normal life, go to work in the morning, come home, they're at home, come home in the afternoon, and they're there that afternoon. They never know a lot of these things go on unless they just read it in the paper.
When did you begin to notice the methamphetamines and our drug issue begin to spike?
I was working narcotics myself and Steve Taylor in 1993, and at that time we were just then starting to see crack cocaine here in Cookeville. We had powder cocaine, we had marijuana. Occasionally there would be this guy. His name was Onion Head. He would drive through and he'd sell psychedelic mushrooms and LSD.
Onion Head.
And he drove a Volkswagen microbus. All right, so and he would just make his rounds around the country, I guess, or the Southeast or throughout Tennessee. But in about 1994, we get the Postal Service had seized 4 ounces of methamphetamine coming out of California. Okay, and this person was shipping it back to a relative here to sell. Well, what eventually happened, this person came to Cookeville and came to Putnam County and started teaching people different aspects of cooking meth. And they would get these precursors and bring them to him, and he would cook it. And that's when you saw the explosion of methamphetamine in the Upper Cumberland. At one time, we were seizing 5 or 6, 7 meth labs a week.
Wow.
Now, a meth lab, technically, as it progressed, could be nothing more than I'm not going to tell people how to make it, but basically a Coke bottle, and they're using the chemicals and different procedures to make meth. But it's still very toxic, extremely hazardous. If something goes wrong, it can explode. There's a lot, back during the 90s and early 2000s, a lot of homes that exploded and caught on fire were due to, not all, but a lot were due to meth labs exploding.
Here in Putnam County?
Here in Putnam County, Upper Cumberland area, all through the state.
Wow.
And killing a lot of people. So that was just it. The very first we saw was that 4 ounces. And within 6 months after it showed up, this person came back to Putnam County and started teaching people how to do this, and it exploded. And methamphetamine today, of course, we still all hear about fentanyl, and fentanyl, in the last, 4, 5, 6 years, has led to the deaths of a lot of people due to overdoses. But methamphetamine is still, you talk to people from the TBI crime lab, it's the number one drug that gets turned in.
Here in Middle Tennessee or just the state?
State. Yeah.
I had read a statistic, and this was probably 10 or 15 years ago, that at any given moment, there was like 3,000 meth labs in our area that were operating. I'm sure most of those were roving meth labs in the hood and trunks of cars and the whole Coke bottle, shake and bake. Mm-hmm. Has it come down any, or is it?
Oh, dramatically.
Okay.
So what occurred? 2010, 2011, right in there, 2012. All right, and I'll kind of get into I guess you could say the politics of it. So China started sending the precursors to Mexico. the cartels started making methamphetamine, which is crystallized. I mean, it was pure. And it was so much cheaper for people to buy methamphetamine coming out of Mexico rather than go around and try to get all the components and cook it themselves. So what happened, it started getting exported from Mexico into the United States and being pushed by the cartels. So even today, most of the meth that we find come out of Mexico.
That a couple weeks ago, a couple months ago, they had that Cookeville couple coming up out of Texas. That the county were they bringing up meth? So that the stories they had a truck they were coming up and they basically shot themselves. They death by cop
down in Texas.
Coming up out of Amarillo, actually.
Yeah.
Any word on that?
I'm not for sure if it was meth or fentanyl.
Okay, but they were bringing drugs up.
Yes.
But they were based out of here in Cookeville.
Yes. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Again, when I was working drugs, it was mainly just local stuff. I've been into a lot of drug lab, meth labs, and that's what's bad. When we first started seeing it, at the time we didn't know the hazards necessarily.
Yeah.
And I can think of times I've walked in, somebody's cooking or making meth. So, as time went along and training and understanding of the hazards of it, our officers got a lot of training. Now, when it got to where whenever you were breaking down a meth lab, you're in a Tyvek suit, you got a respirator on, you got gloves, you're sealed up because of all the hazards it poses. But again, while we still see mainly the majority is methamphetamine, but the fentanyl is what's caused so many overdose deaths in this country. I mean, you think over 100,000 people have overdosed, and I know several, here in Putnam County who've died.
We had one of our church members overdose on fentanyl a couple years ago.
Well, I can't think of anyone who hasn't been touched in some way to drug addiction or overdose death or overdoses. Everybody I know knows someone.
Yeah.
So it's very personal.
You say 100,000 deaths. Is that in the last year? Is that in the last 10 years? Or
no, that was a year. Annually. It has dropped my understanding, it has dropped. I haven't looked at the statistics so far year to date, but for the last several years, it's been over 100,000.
Wow.
And you think, you think about homicides by firearm, that's, 25 to 30,000 people a year. 40 to 45,000 people a year get killed in car crashes. So that those two combined.
Wow, that puts it into perspective.
Yeah, so, that it's still significantly higher than those two combined, and that nationally.
Yeah. Wow. I didn't realize it was that bad. And Nancy Reagan was trying to teach us to say no to drugs back in the 80s.
Oh, yeah. Just say no, And it's a simple concept, but it's true.
Yeah.
It was true then, and people made fun of her.
Yeah.
Those of us old enough to remember, people, it was kind of a joke. Just say no to this, but it's true.
It is that simple.
It is that simple. Just say no.
Well, last question here. What is one element of policing that maybe your average citizen has no idea about that you would want them to know about?
I'd really want them to know how much our officers truly care.
Yeah.
How they want to help people. Again, what you see on television, even just the television shows, but they truly, our officers want to help people. That's what they want to do. Even when you stop and arrest somebody for DUI, you're helping that person.
Sure.
We always say you never know if half mile down the road they wreck, kill themselves, kill someone else, or just property damage.
Yeah.
You never know, but our officers want to help people. And the bravado and the type A personalities, the alpha type personalities of everybody involved, but they want to help people.
Yeah.
Then they may be a little gruff. We get that way. We have sometimes pretty rough sense of humor and whatnot. But when you've been in this line of work, a lot of times people say, well, how can you laugh at this? Or how, you either laugh or cry.
Sure.
And officers, I'll tell you, if you look at the police officer memorial page, how many officers die from suicide?
Yeah.
Because of the stresses of this job, And I often say that if you look at an officer with a significant career, they're going to come out the other end with certain symptoms of PTSD.
Sure.
Because it's just a death by 1,000 cuts type of thing. I go into a restaurant. These are conversations I've had with my kids growing up. I had with their wives. I've had with my grandchildren. You see Papa do something, go the other way. If I sit with my back, I'm facing the door. It's funny. The only time I don't is when I happen to be around other officers and they happen to get the seat first.
Yeah.
But I know them. But I've had those conversations with them. You see me doing something, you go, you get out.
Yeah.
And people don't think about. You've never had to have that conversation with your kids or your grandkids. And you walk into a place, it's so funny, you can spot a cop. Another cop spot a cop. You walk, any place we walk out, we're looking at exits, we're looking at people. We just scan it. And then we do it real quick.
Yeah.
It's not like you sit there, but you just take a quick, you observe what's your surroundings.
Sure.
And you're always living. My wife always says, it's a term she's picked up, she's heard me say, it's hypervigilant.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's good just to do nothing and vegetate.
They trained us when we were doing the chaplaincy training about hypervigilance for you guys and how exhausting it is and how you can't turn it off.
No, you never do. Once you've been in this line of work for any period of time, you will always do those things. You just do.
Yeah. It's a pathetic minor example, but when I worked at the zinc mine, as a geologist, safety is like the number one priority because if you have one injury, MSHA, Mine Safety Health Administration, comes in and shuts you down. You can't afford that because you're making money producing your ore. And so it's a hypervigilance on safety. And they drill it into you and they drill it into you and they drill it into you because you can't even have the slightest of injury. But so every day we had to do acts of safety. And everybody is scouring the mine for acts of safety because you have to get one turned in on your card, the safety card every day. So consequently, it's the safest place probably in the world to work because there's no trip hazards, there's no fall hazards, there's no stabbing hazards. But you come home from that, and I can't even, this is 15, 18 years ago, you can't even walk around your apartment without spotting trip hazards, fall hazards. And it was exhausting to my wife. Like, can we just leave the vacuum cleaner out? No, honey, that's a trip hazard. Yeah. And that's a pathetic in comparison to policing. It's the same mindset. It's psychology.
Yeah, it is.
It's like the war vets coming home and they can't even trust a bag of trash on the side of 111 because it might be an IED, but this isn't Afghanistan. It's Sparta.
Yeah.
I can't imagine just having your brain like that for so long. How do you decompress?
Yeah. I mentioned at the beginning of this, I grew up on a family farm, still live on a family farm. I go out and I go fencing. When I say I'm putting up fence, barbed wire fence, and I'm out there all by myself. And right now the only thing I worry about are snakes. And but that's the nature of the beast.
But Chief, we appreciate what you do for our city and the high standard you maintain over there. I've been able to see it firsthand. It is impressive. It's fun to be a part of.
Well, I appreciate that, and I want to say this: that your thanks. I appreciate that thanks, but it goes toward the people that are working at the Cookeville Police Department.
Yes, sir.
It goes to those men and women out there on the road and those detectives and everybody else. That's where it goes.
Yes, sir. We appreciate you sitting down with us and doing this interview.
Thank you.
Yes,
I
sir.
enjoyed it.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you very much.
Yeah, very welcome.
All right.
Today we're talking about the two ministers found in God's Word, the two categories of ministers, that is. And these two ministers are collectively called, number one, the ministers of reconciliation, and then the ministers of retribution. This is a bigger discussion in talking about those that enforce and teach God's law, what we would call divine law, and then those that teach and enforce civil law. So really what we're doing is we're comparing and contrasting preachers with police, preachers with civil leaders. We have what are called gospel ministers, and then we have what we would call theologically Romans 13 ministers. So this comes back to a bigger discussion on the nature of law. And the New Testament tells us we have this royal law of love. And if you've run in church circles long enough, you've probably heard the discussion of we're only under one law now. That one law is love. And surely we are truly under one law, and that is the law of love. But unfortunately, mankind is so ignorant, you can't just say we're under the law of love. God recognizes mankind's proclivity to ignorance and stupidity. He goes on and begins to help us understand what he means when he, in the maturation of his word there in the New Testament, the book of James, he teaches us the royal law of love. If you work backwards from James to Paul to the Lord Jesus back to Moses, you can see that this royal law of love is a lot more than just loving what you love and then get out of my way because I love what I love. If the New Testament says there's one law, the royal law of love, if we go back, we find that Paul says in Romans that if you love your neighbor, that fulfills the law. And we say, okay, if I love my neighbor, that fulfills the law. But we can't stop there because without the law, Paul said, I don't know how to love. I don't know covetousness, except the law says don't covet. So we're working backwards from the New Testament towards the Old Testament to Mount Sinai in the giving of the law, the Ten Commandments. James says royal law of love. Paul says love your neighbor is the fulfillment of the law. We come back into the Gospels. Jesus Christ says all the law and the prophets are summarized or hang on two commandments. What are the greatest commandments? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second commandment is like unto the first, love your neighbor as yourself. Now, this is fascinating because what it means is the royal law of love isn't just love, and love for love's sake. The royal law of love, when it is diffracted or refracted through the gospel, it tells us that love is really in two directions. We love God with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and we love our neighbor as ourself. So this concept of love, God is love, the commandment of the law is a love-based law, but that love isn't just free to love in any direction. The Word of God and the Ten Commandments and the mitzvah, that is the Old Testament law, coming into the New Testament, teaches us how to love God and how to love our neighbor. So we're going backwards because it really is a pyramid. Love, that's our royal law. But then as we love, we come down and we love God and we love our neighbor as ourself. That's great. That's really two commandments. But in between loving God and loving man, God understands sin nature and that we're going to come up with a lot of squirrely stupidity in between loving God and loving man. And then we'll philosophize and say, well, what does it mean to love God? And who is God? And what does it mean to love our neighbor? And who is my neighbor? Remember, even Cain said, who is my neighbor? Am I my brother's keeper? Who is my neighbor? So that's when the Ten Commandments comes into play. I've made a list of them here. And I love the simplicity and the brilliancy that is the mind of God. The Ten Commandments, the Bible tells us, from Exodus 20, are written on two tablets of stone. And on one table of stone are all the commandments that are God word. They are the commandments that teach us, in essence, how to love God. If you're not familiar with them, I'll read you those 4 commandments. The 10 commandments takes the royal law of love, it diffracts it in the two directions that we're commanded to love God and love our neighbor. And the 10 commandments gives us 10 commands on what loving God looks like and what loving our neighbor looks like. All right, so let me read you the commandments that are on the first table. Now, I haven't forgotten our bigger subject, which are the ministers of the New Testament, the ministers of reconciliation and the ministers of retribution. So on the first table, this is love toward God. The first commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me. How do we love God? We have no other gods. Number 2, thou shalt make no graven images or idols. How do we love God? We don't worship idols. We don't even make them. We don't even give place to them. Number 3, thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain. That isn't just cussing with a JC or a GD. Taking the Lord's name in vain means you invoke his name upon your life and then you don't live worthy of his calling. Or in modern vernacular, we'd say you call yourself a Christian business owner and you seal a deal by invoking your Christianity and then you're a dirty Christian or dirty business owner. That's one instance of taking the Lord's name in vain. If you love God, you won't do that. And then the fourth commandment is remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. There is one day in the week where we set it aside to honor God. It's our holy day. It's our high day. This is the day we come to church. We come to His house. It's a holy day. It's a high day. We dress up in our very best, not because He cares about our clothing, but it's dressing up in your best, what we used to call your Sunday best, is a form of worship. There's one day a week where we give God our absolute best. The other 6 days, we can slink around, lounge around in our lounge pants and our hippie shoes, but there ought to be one day a week our hearts and our life of worship sets aside to seek God at His holy house and come up in our best way possible. Those are 4 of the 10 commandments that teach us how to love God. Now, the other 6 commandments are on the second tablet of stone, and they teach us love toward our neighbor. So the first neighbor you and I ever have when we are born into the earth is mom and dad. And so it's fascinating that the first commandment toward your neighbor is honor your father and mother and live. How do we learn to love our neighbor? Our first neighbors are our parents, and our parents teach us how to honor them and show love toward them. Number 2, thou shalt not kill. Well, love doesn't murder people. Love has never been to a divorce court. Love has never been on murder charges. Number 3, thou shalt not commit adultery. Well, your wife is your closest neighbor, and I do think it's interesting, thou shalt not kill. The first murder was between 2 brothers in the same household after a worship service. The third commandment towards your neighbor is don't commit adultery. That's your wife. That's your husband. That's the spouse of your covenant. When you love your spouse, you don't commit adultery. When you love your spouse, you don't commit adultery. Fourth commandment, thou shalt not steal. You don't steal from your neighbor. The Old Testament says, your neighbor dwells with you safely. He dwells beside you safely. Don't betray that trust by stealing. When you love somebody, when you walk in biblical love, you don't steal. Fifth one is thou shalt not bear false witness. That is to lie under oath, to perjure yourself. You just don't lie. Thou shalt not lie. The Bible says in the book of Proverbs that a lying tongue hates those that it afflicts. You only lie to those you hate. You never lie to those you love. So when you do lie, you typically lie out of fear, but also recognize it is not a manifestation of biblical love. And then our sixth and final commandment that teaches us how to love our neighbor is thou shalt not covet. Now, that is to want, and that lust, that jealousy, that greed. The want is not the problem. The jealousy and the greed and the scheming to make it yours, that becomes problematic. Now, I find it interesting that these are our 10 commandments. The Old Testament is considered to have what are called the 613 mitzvah. That is, there are 613 commandments in the Old Testament. Here are 10 of them. And from these 10 commandments, there are 600, we'll say basically 12 more to go. The first one's love God, love your neighbor. There's 2. Then these 10, there's 12, 601 more after this. And the remaining 601 commandments fall in between how to love God and how to love your neighbor. They fill in the gaps, just like we cannot leave it at the royal law of love, which is love God, love neighbor. We have to then explain how do we love God and how do we love our neighbor. Just like in a marriage, you tell your husband or your wife you love them, and they say, well, if you love me, this is what I need from you. If you love me, don't say this to me. Don't treat me this way. They have, as we call it, love languages, and we communicate to them in the language where they receive and feel loved. The Old Testament commandments were further expositions of how to love God and how to love your neighbor. And even to this day, we have legislators in Capitol Hill at the State House making new laws, trying to plug in loopholes where carnal humans have found a way in between the 2 fence posts that were the previous laws. Most of our laws now are white-collar laws, and they're all to stop theft. Well, that was summarized in the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not steal. Now we have, 100,000 laws trying to say in 100,000 different ways, don't steal, don't embezzle, no insider trading. Now, all of that said, these laws are given for the purpose of peace. One of the Jewish sages observed, and I'm going to quote here, the rejection of the first half of the 10 Commandments, that is, rejecting how to love God, result in the infraction of the second half. You can't love God and divorce your spouse. You can't love God and serve him and steal and lie. You can't love God and serve him and commit murder. So the Jewish rabbis were wise to observe when you reject the first half of the Ten Commandments, you're going to automatically commit trespass against the second half of the Ten Commandments, or really 40 and 60%. One of the things we observe then is that these laws are given, and they are given for peace. All laws are given to keep peace, and that brings us over into the realm of our two ministers now. God has two classifications of ministers. They are traditionally called the ministers of reconciliation. Those would be called preachers and gospel ministers. I'm a gospel minister. I'm a pastor. I've been ordained 25 years now, or licensed and ordained 25 years. My job as a minister of God is to uphold his divine law, the scripture. I teach, I herald, I proclaim it. I teach God's people the word of God. I teach God's people how to live by the Bible, because in God's law, in his New Testament and Old Testament scriptures, these are the words of peace and life. Now, maybe you're listening and you're kind of kicking off or you're bristling. Well, we're free from the law. We're free from the law. That's a really common heresy today. Heresy, why? The Bible says the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. But if we're going to say that we're free from the law, we need to qualify that statement. There are 613 commandments in the Old Testament, and almost 300 of them are repeated in the New Testament. The New Testament has 1,050 commandments. Approximately 200 of those are repetitive, like don't lie, don't forsake the assembly together, basics. So if we distill the repetitive commandments down to a list of just primary commandments, you still have 800 New Testament commandments, which is 25 to 30% more than the Old Testament. So if we're so free from laws and commandments, why do we have more under the new covenant? And by the way, if you want to hold to this facet, this New Testament, this New Age concept that we're free from the law, I'm free from the law, you still have to obey the law. You still have to worship God. That's an Old Testament law. You still have to give him praise and worship. That's an Old Testament law. You're still not free to commit adultery. You're still not free to murder. You're still not free to lie. You're still not free to worship idols or pagans or have other gods. Almost every one of these Old Testament commands are active and alive in the New Covenant. So that's why I don't have a problem saying, give me the law. I need to flourish. Even Paul said the law is good. I am carnal, sold under sin. The law is good then, Romans 7. It's spiritual, but I'm the one who's carnal, sold under sin. I'm the one that makes a mess of everything. The law instructs us in what holiness is. So when we talk about being free from the law, we need to be very careful that we qualify that and we know what we're talking about. Even there in Corinthians, where Paul starts exhorting on using offerings to support gospel ministers, he quotes Deuteronomy and don't muzzle the ox that treads down the corn. That's an Old Testament law. It's an agricultural law. It's also a benevolence law. And Paul says, was it written for their sake or for ours? He says, no, it was written for our sake. He's invoking a law from Deuteronomy to the New Testament minister, and he's calling it a New Testament law, and it's a law that supports financially the gospel minister in his labor. So back to the job of the minister of reconciliation. That's the preacher. We preach God's law. We preach when you're violating God's law, that's called sin, and the only way to atone for your sin is through the blood of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. We preach how to be reconciled to God. We do have permission in the New Testament. If in a church you become too lawless, you become too wild, too rebellious, too carnal, we have permission. 7 New Testament passages give us permission to excommunicate. We don't see that practiced a lot anymore. When we do it, we ought to do it publicly, though I know in our American society, we're probably going to be afraid of lawsuits. But the Bible does still tell us in Romans 16 and 1 Thessalonians, and then in Titus, it tells us in 2 Thessalonians, a lot of examples of excommunicate, mark them, have no fellowship with them, put a mark on them. Those that cause divisions and offenses, mark them. A heretic after the second, third admonition, reject. These are passages that give us permission as ministers of reconciliation to punish those that break the law. But on the flip side of the coin, we don't just have ministers of reconciliation preaching, teaching, and upholding God's divine law. We have ministers of retribution. In this case, we're talking about police, where they enforce natural law, what we might call civil law, the laws of the land, the laws. I'm ministering here in the state of Tennessee, so we have what's called the Tennessee Annotated Code, or Code Annotated, TCA, Tennessee Code Annotated. This is the laws of Tennessee, and our police enforce those laws. They might even pull you over and teach you, ma'am, do you know you were speeding? Ma'am, do you know you can't have that child in the front seat? Ma'am, according to Tennessee TCA, and they go off to name it, scripture and verse, chapter and verse, you can't do this. Your tail light's out. You can't have this party. It violates this noise ordinance. Those are ministers of retribution. And I'm going to read a passage in Romans 13 that talks about these ministers of retribution because I want us to see that they are God's ministers too. In fact, I'm going to read to you out of the New Living Translation. We'll do NIV. Verse 1, let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Twice it says they're established by God. You see the double or the redundancy of God bearing witness to this statement within the same verse. We follow the rules of confirmation, the rules of out of the mouth of two or three witnesses. It's called the rule of witnesses. God gives two witnesses in one verse to affirm this fact. Authorities are established of God. The authorities that exist have been established by God, twice in verse 1, verse 2. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. Verse 3, for rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of the authority, of the one in authority? Then do what is right, and you will be commended. Verse 4 is powerful. For the one in authority, and this is a governor, this is a senator, this is a police officer, a sheriff's deputy. Listen to this. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. We don't teach that much in the post-Black Lives Matter era, the post-defund the police era, but the Bible, the scriptures right here teach us that the person in authority, the person who ministers retribution and enforces the law of the land, he is God's servant for your good. Are there bad cops? Absolutely. Just like there are bad preachers, just like there are bad senators, just like there are bad mothers, and there are bad children. Yes, there's bad cops, but they're still God's servants, just like mama may be a bad mama, but she's still your mama. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants. Again, twice in one verse, Paul affirms and establishes police, sheriff's deputies, SWAT teams, soldiers, they are God's servants. They are agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience. This is also why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants. There's the third witness. Police are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. So what I want to do is give you a list here, and I want to compare ministers of reconciliation, that is the preacher, with the ministers of retribution. In this instance, we're going to say police. So I think if you're listening to this podcast or streaming it, or this radio program, you probably respect the church. A lot of folks don't, but you probably do. So you might have a lot of respect for the preacher, or maybe if you watch the last 30 years of Christian television scandal, maybe you struggle, and I can appreciate the struggle. I'm a preacher, and I have trouble respecting preachers sometimes. But that aside, let's go through a punch list. Let's compare preachers with police, the minister with law enforcement. We preachers are law enforcement. We just enforce God's divine law within our church. The police enforce the law of the land in their city. The deputies enforce the law of the land in their county. So number one, preachers are ordained of God, but we also just saw that with the police. They're ordained of God. Number two, preachers are ministers of spiritual law, but police are ministers of civil law or criminal law. They ministry that. They minister it. They enforce it. Number three, preachers have a limited jurisdiction. We just preach to our own church, or maybe a Bible college, or maybe we're over a couple churches. Maybe we're the bishop over a region or over a diocese, or maybe over a parish, maybe over a region. but even the preacher has a limited jurisdiction, just like the police. Police have a limited jurisdiction. Number 4, preachers have the sword of the Spirit. That is the word of God. That's what we enforce things with. Police have a sword called a pistol, the sword of Gaston Glock, the sword of Smith & Wesson, the sword of Remington, whatever their sidearm is, H&K, Sig Sauer, whatever their sidearm is, that's their weapon. We as preachers, we carry the sword of the Spirit. Number 5, we're preachers of peace, and the police are keepers of peace. We call them peacekeepers. Colt famously had his pistol called the Peacekeeper, and that was for the law enforcement on the Wild Wild West. And how did they keep the peace? They shot bad guys. Bad guys broke the law. When the law is broken, you have to restore law. You have to restore order so that people can dwell peaceably. If we can stop and zoom out and realize that in the big picture, God wants people to dwell at peace, then law enforcement becomes necessary, because there's always going to be that criminal element who refuses to disobey or refuses to obey, and they want to disobey the laws that mom and dad taught them, the laws that the coach taught them, the laws that civil society taught them. They become the criminal element, and thank God we need the police to be peacekeepers and peacemakers to restore law and order. The law-abiding citizens of any town deserve the right. We've earned the right to be able to walk around our streets and not worry about being mugged or shot or kidnapped or defrauded. That's what we have law enforcement for. Our next point, preachers are agents of mercy, and we just read in Romans 13 where the police are agents of wrath. They are God's servants, and as God's servants, they bring the wrath of God upon evildoers. And for that, we support them. We need an element. I hope you understand that this is a ministry of God. Police and sheriff's deputies and SWAT team members, as ministers and servants of God, they are agents of God's wrath against evildoers. I'm quoting this to you from the scripture. I understand in the post #defund the police movement, this sounds foreign. This is biblically grounded. It's biblically established. We as preachers, here's another point of contrast, we're paid by tithes and offerings. The police are paid by taxes. Just like the church members, we pay tithes and offerings, and that funds the preacher and the missionary and the elders and maybe the associate. Our police and our deputies, they're funded by taxes. And our final point, which really shows how parallel agents of reconciliation and agents of wrath are, preachers are hated by the lawless. Lawless people hate preachers because preachers tell them where they're wrong. Preachers tell them what God's word says. But we have this in common with the police. Lawless people hate the police. Lawless people hate to see the police coming. When you're law-abiding, you love the police. When you're law-abiding, when you have no chip on your shoulder, you love to see those blue lights. You love to see them coming to your rescue. But when you are lawless, you hate the police and you hate the preacher because you're going to be told where you're wrong. And both the preacher and the police exist to maintain peace in a community, in a city, in a county, in a region. And when we have strong preachers and strong police, everybody who hates God and who hates the cops gets to dwell peaceably too. That's why I want to encourage you, pray for your local police, pray for your local law enforcement. It's not an easy job. They just want to go home at the end of the day too. Hope you've been blessed. God bless you guys. We'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us today. If you've been blessed by this interview and teaching, please feel free to subscribe and leave a review. It will help me continue to grow this podcast. My aim is to interview Christians from all over the world and from every facet of life so we can appreciate the body of Christ and what he's been doing and continues to do in the earth. Theology, Things, and Stuff is produced by Engrafted Word Church, located in Cookeville, Tennessee. For more information, visit us at theologythingsandstuff.com. God bless you, and thank you.